Hey there everyone, back at it again with a new video review. This time I'm doing 3 movies for the price of one. The subject? Crossover films, particularly the most recent ones that have come out and have gained the most, not so much cult following as it is attention for those a fan of nostalgia, action, adventure, and a lot more. These 3 films: Ready Player One, Space Jam 2: A New Legacy, and Chip and Dale: A Rescue Rangers. These films have been infamous for their crossover action, adventure, story plot lines, usually involving a lot of multimedia, and I'm here today to discuss them fully with what they have going for them, what they didn't have going for them, and a lot more. Now, I'm gonna be spoiling all 3 films, so if you haven't watched them at once, I'd recommend that don't bother watching this unless you've seen them, alright? Okay, so if you're still here, then you're here to listen. Now, the first thing to get here, I'm gonna be going back and forth between what each film has and what few of them have in common. But the first thing I'm gonna mention is what they all had in common, all 3 together. For one thing, they're crossovers, obviously, combining old live action properties, animated properties, and much more. They all connect live action and animation in some way or another, like Roger Rabbit, like going from live action human characters to cartoony or even sometimes CGI animated characters in some shape or form. Either classic animation, current animation, odd animation. I know that sounds weird, but if you see Chip and Dale, you'll know what I mean. And the biggest thing they all had in common, their excessive use of drama. In other words, that they always had to have a conflict between each and every one of them to further along the story for them. And that's not a bad thing. That some of them do work it off well, some, but I'm not here to critique what each film had, like bad. I'm just going to talk about what they had in common. And it may sound negative, but they're all right for what they're trying to do, but also in some regards could have been done better. Now, for the first one, I'm going to be talking about the first one released recently, Ready Player One, the huge VR contest deal that was set inside the Oasis, or as I like to call it, just the internet made into a VR game. To me, this was the better of the 3, and again, not trying to put down the other 2, it's just objectively, I think this one had the better aspects of it all. For one thing, there's the references. Since this is like a huge throwback to all those other things, movies, TVs, video games, magazines, pop culture, stuff like that. They make better use out of it, as say old toys made into weapons, old objects from films and video games used, like some even recent action scenes, gore, horror, comedy, something like that. Each made into its own deal, along with a lot of classic music, like a lot. Like enough to where you're reminded of the simpler times and can be easily drawn into the whole world it's trying to build. Along with that, it has the most action of all the other 3 because it has the most stakes because of the idea of life and death, slavery, active murder, stuff that would generally be a lot darker than those other 2 later on. Not to mention, it has many different genres corresponding with one another. Like I said, comedy and horror, along with mystery and a lot more. Like I said, it's a huge throwback, so there's going to be a lot of things. Like, for instance, the Stephen King The Shining reference scene, as well as many others, like, say, the Holy Hand Grenade, all video game references in the final battle, and a lot more to that. like I said, has the best use of all the other references from any shape or form because when on the internet, it's hard pressed not to find a site or any way or another trying to reference the old ways of doing things but not so old, so it's like that bad. But yeah, it's got the best of that, as well as having the most original characters. Because in the later two films, their characters are already well known. For Ready Player One, it's based off a book, so any character from there is already from there. Even when they use like known characters in some scenes, like say Tracer from Overwatch, any sort of like FPS shooter or horror movie icon, they're all made as some sort of AI or just a character skin, like you would see in any MMO or in any internet chat. Basically how people wish to represent one another online or wish to look like, and it's objectively better in that regard since we know that they're all just a bunch of people pretending to be who they aren't and all that. And that's okay, because that's literally the world. Like, regardless of the time skip in that film or even in current days, it's always been like that. Now, again, it's nothing bad, it's just along the lines of how it's better represented than the other crossovers later on. Because, as you'll see, there are some that try to leave too heavily in all the source material. Which brings me to Space Jam 2. Now, this one, like, I've had history with Space Jam. Like many other people my age, I remember watching the original Space Jam on VHS back when I was a kid. Watching all the time, loving all the references, loving all the interactions between Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny. And then there was the big story that there was a good enough stakes to have the characters invested in it. Now, here's the thing, despite it being proclaimed as its sequel, it's not really connected. I mean, for starters, the first film had Michael Jordan going to the Toon World, physically going there, where in this new one, it's a huge computer simulation, an amalgamation of all of the Warner Bros. Properties. Any film, game, show, anything like that was all put in there in one giant internet space. It's like trying to be Ready Player One, but also it's unclear whether or not they're trying to say that these are just how the characters acted because that's how they acted. And it's alright, except for how some things are. And like I said earlier, there are some characters that are familiar to everyone. Like the main characters, LeBron and Bugs Bunny, already well known culture icons. One in sports, one in animation, and just pop culture as a whole at this point. And their interactions are decent enough for a entertaining dynamic. Like they're not gonna make me bust a gut laughing. They're just gonna make you go, that's alright. And I'm not saying Jordan's interaction with Bugs was any better. No offense to Jordan, but he was pretty oddly stoked despite the fact that he was talking to living cartoon characters, physically touching and moving them around. Which, by the way, isn't that bad, but also a lot of the interactions are what is the main focus in this film. Because they try to make LeBron as this one really stern dad that wants his son to be this one thing, but he doesn't want to be this thing. And this villain is basically the leader of this whole computer world who, to put it simply, like, I don't know what the goal was, but it's basically just fan fiction. Like, the idea is he wants to put LeBron in existing properties. That's basically fan fiction. Like, you can't tell me that it isn't. It wasn't even anything original. It was just him wanting to be in there. At least with Ready Player One, we had a decent enough excuse for them being in The Shining. They want to find the next piece to the key, and that's another connection between those two films in particular. Both are Warner Bros. Owned, so any and all references are Warner Bros. Property, like say Blizzard Entertainment, any sort of DC character or anything like that, all owned by Warner Bros. And you'll understand when I say that later on because it'll make sense when I get to Rescue Rangers. Now, as for the actual pacing of Space Jam 2, I gotta say it has the most expositions, like the hardest to follow along because it keeps going back and forth, fast forward, fast backward, all that. They really try to shoehorn in as much as they could, and at times, especially if you want to rewatch it, you can like feel its speed going pretty quick. Like say when LeBron and Bugs are all gathering the tunes, and you thought it'd be cool seeing them in these other worlds, but they're as short as their introduction. Like you see the obscure reference of the show, movie, classic, and then boom, they're right in there, just dressed up or looking like they're from that property, and it leaves you wanting more, but also wishing that you didn't have to go through that point. And bear in mind, this is all computer programmed, so how was it like computer logic that these characters, like the Looney Tunes, would want to go to all these other worlds? I mean, their whole shtick is that they're parroting these characters, like these worlds and all that. They're not made to just go into them and all just abandon their loony lifestyles. They're made to parody these guys. Like, I mean, for God's sakes, Mad Max is literally just the Roadrunner Coyote cartoons. I mean, it's got the same death, dismemberment, and destruction. Well, at least for the Coyote, like, not so much for the Roadrunner, who was unaffected in any way. Now, there's this other thing about Space Jam 2. It has the most obscure references. Anyone who saw the original trailer and was hyped to see it saw the huge lineup of all the other characters: the Flintstones, Jetsons, Scooby Doo, Iron Giant, King Kong, Superman, Space Ghost. And how were they all shown in the film? In the very end. Like, it wasn't the huge switching between worlds thing that was slow, it was the entire audience of the basketball game, which was said to be the highlight of the film, and it comes off more as just boring since when you see all these other characters, you don't want to see a basketball game, especially with how toned down it is and simplistic it becomes. You want to see all these other different obscure references because you were promised more of them, and they're just made as background noise. I mean, you could see them, but that's it. You could see the Mask, you could see Catwoman, you could even see the Warner brothers and sister, but other than that, that's all you get. You don't get anything other than just seeing them there, or just make some interaction side to side from anything. I mean, at least with the world hopping, we got some exposition, but that was mostly through the first world they visited, the DC world, where they actually met the Justice League. It was only like very brief, like they were on screen for like 3 seconds, barely that long, and they didn't speak a word. So it shows this, and it stands to show how little faith they had, including these other properties, if the main draw was LeBron. Because really, like, I know he's a good basketball player, like certainly ain't Jordan, that much is clear, but they hype him up so much. I mean, the first 5 minutes alone are just like a glamour video for him, like talking about all his accomplishments, all the games he's won, all the things he's been able to do, like meeting Obama, all his kids' accomplishments. But also, you gotta admit that it couldn't hurt to be toned down a little. I mean, with the original Space Jam, you saw Michael, and it was more humble because he didn't let it go to his head. He wasn't proclaimed as the king like it is in Space Jam 2. He's proclaimed as a good basketball player. And he is, he's the best. But also, he was more down to earth. He wasn't all about the fundamentals as LeBron has just keep shouting all over through the film, and it gets annoying. I mean, he says he's a fan of these tunes, but also like he should know they're gonna be loony, but also be contradictory to them wanting to leave the loony lifestyle to go through another world that's a little more serious, but that's beside the point. He knows these characters, and it showed a lot more interaction. Like it was hinted at in the first few minutes, with his flashback as a kid, playing some Looney Tunes game. But that was it. I mean, yeah, there was less with like the first Space Jam. I mean, the only thing that Michael ever saw was some cartoons with his kids. But even still, it made you feel like there'd be a greater connection between them. I mean, you could get a hint at it at the end of Space Jam 2 when Bugs and LeBron are hanging around, like after dropping his son off. But it's hard to enjoy when, for the majority of the film, they were just going back and forth with each other. I mean, arguably, Bugs was the best character in the film, but that's because he's Bugs Bunny. I mean, he's gonna be the best. Like I said, there are some issues and all that, but also, as far as crossover films go, it's the most obscure because of how little they actually do with all these different properties and stuff. I mean, with Ready Player One, we at least had a reason for all them being there. I mean, because this one is just trying to do that, but also not trying to do that. Because, I mean, they got the whole thing down. They could go into those other worlds and replay those scenes, which they somewhat did, but also it felt like they didn't have enough faith in it. Twitch was the biggest deal. They didn't have faith in all those other properties, and the biggest draw had to be the two big names. LeBron, Bugs Bunny. That's it. And even then, it doesn't work. I mean, I remember a lot of backlash this film had just for changing Lola Bunny's design. Because, let's be honest, she was really much a furry back in the original Space Jam. But also, there was like no furtherment of her like character. I mean, sure, she trained with Wonder Woman, but also like, why did she want to? Like, why did any of the characters want to? Just because they were convinced to be like going to these other better worlds in comparison to their normal, boring loony world? And I'm like, why would they leave in the first place? Yeah, okay, I'm gonna move on because if you haven't noticed, there's gonna be a lot more arguments for these films, depending on all the faults I saw with them. Again, they're still fun. They got decent enough animation, but also you want there to be more done with what they have planned, what they could have done, as well as how it felt like in some it didn't need all this extra stuff. Alright, next I'm gonna move on to Rescue Rangers, the one I was most excited for. In fact, more so than Ready Player One or even Space Jam 2, because it was seeing Rescue Rangers. I loved that show when I was a kid. I remember watching all the time on my DVD player, because I had the box set, played it all the time. Loved the Adventures of Chip and Dale, because I love Chip and Dale as the character, and loved the extra characters like Monty, Gadget, Zipper. They had good dynamic between one another. And this film took a turn I did not at all expect. For one thing, despite it being called Rescue Rangers, it's more or less a parody of it. Like, in this world, they're all actors behind the scenes. All the adventures they were on were fake. I mean, yeah, it could make sense, but also, it kind of ruins a bit of the magic for a lot of these characters, especially for the big bad in this film, like Big Pete, who was just an older version of Peter Pan, taking all the cause because it's similar to how it was with the original Peter Pan's voice actor in the animated film, to which a lot of people feel is disrespectful. I felt the same as well because it was pretty harsh to put him in that position, especially when they gave him no forgiving qualities. Now, as for how these worlds combined, like a majority of Rescue Rangers is live action. It goes with the more Roger Rabbit feel that you see the characters go back and forth between live action and like animation, and the other ones, this one, is all live action with the anime characters in, and they look alright in some regards. Best looking ones are arguably the side characters because they, for some reason, made Chip and Dale animated 2D and CGI. Dale looks fine in CGI because it mixes more with the background. Problem with Chip, he looks weird, like a weird 3D, 2D like fixture. Like, it's hard to see whether or not he's supposed to be flat looking or third dimensional looking because it becomes like an eyesore real quick. Like your eyes would hurt when you look at him. Now, the biggest thing with this film that had everyone's attention was the greater sense of crossovers, like media. The Ready Player One and Space Jam 2, all of them Warner Bros. Properties. This one, it's not just Disney. You could see South Park characters, Netflix characters, DreamWorks characters, even DC characters. And you're like, whoa, how did they get all these guys here? And you're surprised when you can spot them all one by one. But that's the only advantage they can have. If the most they have is just a lot more crossover potentials, or a lot more references. Which isn't a bad thing, except when they make the whole film to be as a satire of modern culture. Reboots, sequels, imaginings, recreations, all that. And it can become annoying, especially when they constantly break the fourth wall about their own show, where they comment how they made it all happen, all the different adventures were staged, even if they do actually say some of the episode names. But also, it could have been done better. Also, this thing is apparently a origin story for Chip and Dale. Yeah, the beginning of the film is literally the beginning of their whole relationship. When they were kids in school, the first day and all that, then growing up to high school, then to college, then becoming Hollywood stand-ins, then getting their own show. This would have been fine if they made more use out of the other characters. Despite it being called Rescue Rangers, you don't see much of the Rangers. I mean, sure, you see enough reason for them to go after and try and save their friend Monty, but other than that, the rest of the Rangers aren't even there. And for a weird, connection, they made Zipper and Gadget a couple, and I'm like, they canonized a couple between a mouse and a fly with no regards to the show that clearly said that Gadget and Chip were a thing, and say that they had no prior buildup. Like, did they not have any ideas for how to make them? And on how they're pretty much shown 3 times in the film. First, in the beginning, showing off the show, the highlight, the heyday. Then a few expositions talking about on how they apparently had kids, which, yikes. Then later when they help Dale during the final battle, and then show up in the fire at the end of the battle. They have as little to do in the film as all their references, or all the just odd forms of using them. Now, it has the most, yes, but it doesn't mean that they make good on all of them. You can see them, you can watch them interact, you can hear them talk even, but that's it. You'll see some interactions, some little coy jokes, on all of them, but also, that's it. You're just gonna be couldn't we have gotten more of that, or say more of the Rangers? Like hell, it would have been more interesting if, say, behind the scenes it was Monty and Gadget that got together. So enough reason to include Gadget more, because she'd be looking for her boyfriend or even husband who's gone missing because of his eating habits, and it's gonna be bootlegged. And then there's the whole villain deal, which I feel like they wasted an opportunity when they hint at and even like teased like Fat Cat being there, the main villain of the original series. And I know it was going for the whole stage thing, but did they have to have a adult version of Peter Pan, especially when they had a character from one of those films still a kid? Yeah, I'm not even joking. They had a kid, like one of those little, I don't remember their names, but one of Peter Pan's little helpers back in the forest in Neverland. He was still a kid, yet Peter had grown up to a middle-aged, grumpy old man. Why can't they keep it consistent? If the boy who never grew up, then the same should have been applied to the other characters, or even just like any other featured character on there. I mean, you could see He-Man, he was in the 60s. He could have been turned into an old man. Like, they really didn't have a firm way of how to explain them. Even when the relationship between Chip and Dale becomes a little, like, bland. You hear them, you see them, they talk and they interact all throughout the film, and you're left wishing there could be an icebreaker more often. Like, 80% of the film they're talking, and 10% they're actually interacting with other people. The rest is just extra stuff, references, or the characters talking. That's it. And you're like, you wish it didn't have to be like that. You wish there would have been more of it, more of the actual characters, not just some weird satire crossover deal. Now, this has gone long enough, but my point stands on these movies. They're good. I know I badmouth a lot of them, but that's also my opinion. I don't want to change anyone's mind because of what I say, nor do I think that you should depend your opinion or personal review of any film or show you watch based on someone else's point of view. I mean, personally, like Rotten Tomatoes gave Chip and Dale like a 78%. I gave it barely a 40. So, if you love these films, good on you. I ain't gonna judge you, nor will I judge you if you like or hate any of the other films. You could hate Ready Player One but love Space Jam 2. That's fine with me. But also, keep in mind that your opinion matters most of all. Don't ever forget that. Like and subscribe. Hope you enjoyed the video.